Bon dia, Eva Corja. Hello, everybody. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. And this is Fireside Chat 108. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or if you're listening to a recording of this Fireside Chat. So as I always do, I will begin with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiakon ar fud na crinne. Gomara Shiakon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha. Gunairi Lin Lenar Kuj Garamaka. Gamij buichas Jeev, Je Chuvdaga is spirit Quivdaga. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. For peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cry of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So it's lovely to see you. Hello from Suffolk, West Cornwall. Quick week. Yes, absolutely. Time is really, really flying. Greetings from sunny northern Arapaho, eastern Shoshone Territory, Wyoming. It's very dull and damp and not cold, not just damp in Ireland here. Eagle River, Alaska. Okay, Norfolk, hi Linda. That's Australia. South Wales, Hertfordshire, Crouch End, Finland. Lovely to see you. Portugal, that's wonderful. A mild London. Yes, you're lucky. South Wales, Winchester again. Brilliant. Just wonderful to see you all. Mild Cheshire. Okay, well, it is mild here, just wet and damp, which can often feel cold. Wonderful. So, hi, Gunter from Switzerland, Washington. Brilliant. I see somebody saying, how lovely to see familiar names. Absolutely, it is lovely to see familiar names. So you're all welcome back. And for newcomers, you're also welcome. Sweden is here. Wonderful. That's brilliant. So well done, Scandinavia. So there's Finland and Sweden here today. Brilliant. Arizona, LA County, Kinsale. Lovely. Prince Edward Island. Wonderful. Slough. Brilliant. California. Wonderful. Drowning in LA County. Okay. I hope that's not a bad drowning. I hope you're getting plenty of the water you need. Bay Area, California. Wonderful. So we are going across the Atlantic this evening, and let me introduce my guest, Ben Stimson. Ben, you are very, very welcome.
Diolch yn fawr iawn am siarad â mi, Eimear. Thank you for speaking with me today.
You're very tough road. So you can speak Welsh and I'll speak Irish. So just explain where you are and why you're there.
Of course. So I am coming from Kitchener, Ontario in Canada, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm situated on the Haldimand Track, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Chinonton peoples. And where Kitchener is, it's about an hour and a half west-ish from Toronto. Okay. And so I'm in Southern Ontario on the same parallel as Northern California. So that kind of gives people a sense of how far down on Canada is.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, Flinty Byrne says, woohoo, evening then. So you were speaking Welsh, and I know you have what would you say, an indefinable accent, simply because it seems to be, not that it's accentless, it's that you seem to have many accents. So
I don't know where I'm from half the time, and if there are Welsh speakers in the chat, I need to clear something up and say Dwi siarad Cymraeg, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg. I'm learning Welsh, and so I'm trying. I am trying, but I don't want to misrepresent myself. So yeah, my accent is kind of all over the place. You're probably hearing some of the Canadian accent in there. Those who are from North Wales, where I'm originally from, will be picking up the North Welsh. And those of you who are in Northern England, you might be picking up a little bit of Yorkshire and Lancashire. That's where my parents are from. So
Okay.
I'm from half the time.
So what brought you to Ontario then?
I tried to make a joke of this. I was too little to run away, but the reality is I immigrated as a kid. So I was old enough that I retained my accent and memories of the UK, but I was 8.5 when I came over. So, and that I think will come into our conversation throughout today. Yeah.
But Liz Hill says accentful rather than accentless. That's lovely.
Accentful, yes. Well, I'm full of something. That's one thing I'll say about myself.
Brilliant. So before we go on to you again, people have been asking me, is this the Bard, Ovates and Druid tartan? It is, and it just arrived today. So I had Billy Stewart and Kate Mollison on a few weeks ago talking about the Bard, Ovates and Druid tartan. So it's actually arrived, and it feels, I've got the woven one, and it is so soft. I get itchy with wool, and this is just beautiful, just lovely to wear.
Oh, it looks really warm too.
Yes, it is, and very, very light. So one of those magical things about certain wools that are warm and cool at the same time, a bit like silk. So anyway, enough of this. So tell us what it's like being a druid in Ontario. Or what? Yeah. And maybe, I don't know, I want to know what brought you to druidry, but I don't know which.
Of course, yeah. Well, the next hour of our conversation in answering that. It's a very strange thing. It's a very strange thing. Where I'm situated and where I actually grew up, which is a town about 2 hours north from here, we're right on a boundary between, well, literally my life is liminal space. All of my pieces of my life is liminal space. But where we are, we're on the boundary of two biomes. So I'm in the kind of, I can't think what it's exactly called, but the Eastern Woodlands biome. And then about an hour and a half north, 2 hours from us, you're getting into the boreal forest biome, which is the kind of the pan hemisphere biome that stretches right around into Asia, into northern Scandinavia, and like northern Scotland is part of that biome. So you get a very diverse group of trees and flora where I'm at. And then when you go an hour north, it starts to suddenly change. You're getting a lot more evergreen trees. The land starts to change. And so it feels very liminal where I am at. And we're also surrounded by all of the Great Lakes. So we have Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron within about 45 minutes from where I'm currently at. So again, that creates more of a liminal space because we're so close to such huge, big, massive bodies of water too. So it's a very strange experience, and especially my background not being from here, again, very liminal in many ways.
Wow. Just because this is the 108th Fireside Chat, and just as we were, for our viewers, that I just happened to say this to Ben, and then he said, oh, there's a significance to it. So I am going to ask you to explain this. What does 108 mean in Sanskrit?
So 108, and I started to explain it, and Eimear was like, shut up, you don't tell me yet. So 108 is one of the holiest numbers in Hinduism and Buddhism. And Hinduism and Buddhism have played a part in my own spiritual journey. And so nobody exactly knows or can say why 108 is so important in Dharmic traditions. But if you've ever had a set of mala beads, you'll count them and it's 108. And so some people think that it has something to do with kind of sacred geometry, sacred cosmological significance. Some people say that it's because that number goes right back to a very old form of language, like kind of pre-Dravidian languages. And others will say that it has something to do with the number of letters in the Sanskrit alphabet. So there's many different reasons, but you'll see 108 again and again and again throughout all those traditions. So I thought that was kind of cool. I was also shocked that it's been 108 fireside chats. I didn't think, weirdly, I didn't think it was that many, to be honest. But
it doesn't feel like that. Now, so Franklin Lavoie says the yin essence. 1,080 miles is the radius of the moon.
And that's a good point, because like Indian science was like 1,000 years ahead of European science, medieval European science, and 0 is actually where it originated in India. It originated in India about, I want to say, 3,000 years ago. It was taken up by Arabs and the Arabic world, which then filtered on into Europe. So we get 0 from India, which is kind of a cool thing. So they have a huge amount of cosmological calculations of distances of planets, and they were using their solar observatories back 3,000 years ago. They were able to calculate distances between all the heavenly bodies. It's incredible. It really is. So that makes sense.
And then I know from friends, I'm not a numerologist, would say, well, 10 and 8 makes 18, and 1 and 8 makes 9. And we come to a nice sacred number from these lands, you know, 9 being a multiple of 3. It's always fascinating. And then Franklin, thank you, Franklin. The number 108 is divisible by 1. It's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 12, 18, 27, 36, 54, 108. They're, wow. Okay. Thank you,
Franklin. That's awesome. Thank you.
Brilliant. So, what brought you to the? Oh, wait a second. We've got loads of experts here. The angles of a pentagram are 108 degrees.
Okay, that makes sense. And the pentagram does appear in many yantras from Hinduism and Buddhism too, as a geometric figure. So that makes sense.
Wow.
Awesome. Yeah.
It also has connections to the golden ratio. It's interesting. Interesting. I was in Marrakech recently as a teller at an international storytelling festival, and the pentagram is on the Moroccan flag. I hadn't appreciated that until I arrived at customs or at immigration, and the police had pentagrams on their badges. I thought, wow. So I don't know what within Morocco. What that
was. I think it has something to do with the Star of Muhammad in the Star and Crescent. Because in Tunisia, back 20 years ago, a lot of people were able to get pentagrams without being able to go and buy them in metaphysical shops by going to get Tunisian coins from coin exchanges in Canada, because it has a pentagram on it.
Okay.
That's the only reason I know that.
So I'm new to the order. This is Ram. I'm from India. 108 is 1 mala. Yeah. You need to do millions of repetitions of mantras that make malas to call to natural energies and deities in human form. Wow.
True.
So I assume you're doing these repetitions over a lifetime. I wonder, will you ever get there?
Yeah, japas. If you actually, I mean, we're completely going off topic here, but I love it. In Japan, the Buddhist malas that they use there, they have 108, and then they have linked other groupings of beads. And if there's a way of holding them where you do your japa, your mala, your repetition of 1, and then you move up 1 bead on the second one. And if you use all 3 in conjunction, you can do something like 10,000 repetitions in a single sitting. It takes like an hour or 2 hours, but that's what a lot of the Japanese Buddhist priests would do. And so if you ever see that, that's to allow you to keep count so that you can do thousands of repetitions.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's very beautiful too. They're absolutely gorgeous.
I mean, I was brought up with the rosary, from a Roman Catholic background. And it was never something that called to me. So it's really interesting because it was always seen as being taken into play to do this. Very different, just a very different experience for me. So it's fascinating now. Sandy, she bought a Tunisian coin for the pentagram reason.
Oh, there we go. See?
Sandy's in Tintagel. Wonderful. Brilliant. So, anyway, how did you come to Druidry given your... wait a second. Ferdiad, I can't ignore you. There's a pentagon in the middle of a pentagram. Internal angle is 108. The points of the point are 36 internally, which is a factor of 108. 3 by 36.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
I'm just fascinated at the level of engagement about this topic. So many people, we've had comments from different people about this. Thank you, Ferdiad. That's wonderful. Brilliant. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to leave that topic for the moment. And So what brought you to Druidry, or how did you, given you've had a Buddhist Hindu tradition or background, how did you find Druidry and the order?
Absolutely. So it's such a funny and such a long tale. It goes back to one of the reasons that I started looking into spirituality in the first place. So a little backtrack there. When I moved to Canada, I was 8.5 years old, and I didn't get a chance to have a say in it. And that caused a great deal of issues for me because I was old enough to remember home. I was also old enough to have an accent that made me different from so many of the other kids that I was hanging out with. And so I was bullied when I was a kid. And that only entrenched this feeling of, oh, I need to be home. I want to be home. I want to be home again, right? So I think it was when I was about 13 years old, my introduction to paganism, I saw the Mists of Avalon for the first time. And suddenly, I'd grown up with the BBC, I'd grown up with British television, I knew King Arthur, and in North Wales, where I'm from originally, I'm from a little tiny place called Cerwis, which is close to Holywell, so right on about a half hour, 45 minutes down the A5 from the English border. My parents are English, I'm Welsh, so I always saw dual identity there. I saw the Mists of Avalon for the first time. And at that point, I was also coming out and understanding myself as a queer person. And so I was in a town of 18 churches, 18 denominations, and none of them wanted me, right? That was my perception anyways.
Wow.
Kid. And so I saw the Mists of Avalon for the first time, and I was like, what would a spirituality be like for me, which is an all-loving mother goddess? And of course, the Mists of Avalon being set in the Arthurian times, right? So that really sparked an interest in paganism and Wicca for me. And so over the span of from about 14 to, I'd say probably about 27, 28, I was interested in all the various forms of spirituality. Mostly it was kind of paganism and like the paganism of the 2000s books, like Starhawk's books and Margot Adler's books and those types of books. Funnily enough, I never liked Scott Cunningham or those books. I never picked up. It was ones I was able to get, which was the Goddess Spirituality books at that time. So I looked into Hinduism, and I started practicing Hinduism when I was in college for the first time, and then I started to go into a period in my life that was very dark. And I ended up deferring school. I left school just as I was almost finished, and that was a devastating thing for me. But I had a lot going on. I was very, very busy, and at that point, and this is something that was amazing, one of the best things in my life, but also one of the worst things in my life. I had a chance to move home to work in Eastbourne, just outside of Eastbourne, at a place called Hurstmonceux Castle, which is.
Oh, I've seen that. I've been on their website. It's amazing.
It's beautiful. And for me, being a 21-year-old, well, God, how old was I then? Sometime. It was when I was in my early 20s, 2010, to be able to go home after 15 years and work and also spend time over there I think I was over there for about 5 months all in all. It was incredible. And then I came back to Canada.
You know the word you used.
You
said home. You used the word home. That even after, I don't know how old you are now, 2010 you were 20, so I can't do the sums. So you're maturer, and to think that you spent, almost, yes, with 30 odd years, or can I count? I can't remember, forgive me, maybe early 30 years, and Wales is still home.
And Wales was still home, yeah. Well, so we came over in 1995, so it's 15 years. So, 15. But it was one of those, I'd always considered over there home. I'd never felt connected here. And so that's why it was difficult for me to say what it's like being a Druid in Ontario, because, it's a place that I'm in, but it's not home, So I came back and I was overwhelmed and I was deathly homesick and so I started to plan. Okay, well, I want to go home. I want to move home. Now I've actually spent time over there again, reacquainting myself over there. And like when I was working over there, we went to places like Canterbury Cathedral. We went to London every weekend. Then I went up north and spent a month with my sister. My older sister still lives over there, and so I was like taking the train to Llandudno, and I went going up the Great Orme, spending time in Snowdonia. It was incredible. And then I came over here, and it felt the homesickness really got me. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I went into a very dark period in my life. I deferred. I moved in with my parents for a few years, and I started to it was a very dark period. So I started to rebuild my life after that period. I don't want to say it was a mental breakdown. That's a little dramatic, but it was depression. It was depression. And so in 2015, I started reacquainting myself with the pagan community in Ontario here. And I also started to be connected with Lukumi Santeria, which is an Afro-Cuban tradition. When you had Trav Hunter on a few months ago, he spoke about voodoo. So voodoo and Lukumi are sister traditions from different islands, but they're sister traditions.
Sister movements, okay.
I became involved with that, and one of the major pieces out of all of that movement was I started trying to save my BSW that I'd been working on. I transferred and I started training in psychotherapy to try and reclaim all of that. Part of it was I didn't really want to be a social worker. I really wanted to do counseling. That's really what I wanted to do. There's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces to this whole thing. But eventually what happened was I met the right people. I came into the orbit of the right people. Lukumi, one of the biggest pieces is ancestral work. And so I started working and connecting with my ancestors, which was a weird process in itself, being over here and all of my ancestors literally being over there. And so then I wanted to reconnect with my roots, my spiritual roots, which is the Celtic, which is the spirituality of the UK. And so I started looking into it. And it's funny, I came across Druidcast, and at that point, I had about a 2-hour commute to get to class for my psychotherapy. We were talking about podcasts before, you and I. And so I started listening to Druidcast. And so I just went through and started from episode 1 and went through. And the more I listened, the more I heard, the more I loved it. And it's funny because some of the people who I was interacting with in Kitchener here are connected with the Sisterhood of Avalon. Of course, Phil and Drew, all of that crowd, and of course, a lot of the people that Dave was talking to on Druidcast know all of those people. And it's funny because Dave actually came over to Kitchener in around that time, and I didn't know this yet, but he came to do a concert in Kitchener with my friend Tiffany, who eventually went on to become my supervisor in psychotherapy. So a weird collaboration of stuff all came, and now I'm here talking to you.
It's interesting. There are a number of people who left their home when they were very young and have never regarded the new place. Julie says, we moved to America with our young family in 1997. I was there for 17 years, but now we're back in England. America was never home. And Gloria, I know that feeling well. We left Germany and I was 5, but luckily I was able to fly back every summer to be with my family. I do still, however, consider Southern Germany is my other home. And then Poppy, wow, I was 7 when my family moved to the US and I returned to Crete after 15 years. I understand all your feelings. So it's really, really interesting that, and Julie says that pull for home led her to Druidry too. So it's really interesting when, as children, because we don't have agency, parents make decisions for us for whatever reason. But it's great as an adult to be able to say, okay, I can do something about this.
And this is the thing. I'm putting into motion now, moving back to the UK next July. So I've now got to the point in my professional career and kind of my educational career, because I went back and I restarted my BA just to get it finished. And I'm reorganizing that to be focused on classics and medieval studies and religious studies and the things I really should have been doing back when I was 20 and not social work. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. And Poppy, it's comforting to know that others have been through similar experiences. All the years I thought I was the only one. That's why these conversations are really interesting, because you get that universality of experience, that you meet somebody who's had a similar story, and that can be really, really helpful to people who think they're the only one. So, so you're going to then set up as a counsellor psychotherapist in
I am, yes. So this has been part of the plan. I did my psychotherapy education in Toronto, and it kind of tied perfectly with the Druidry, because a lot of the modalities that were being taught, it was transpersonal, it was Jungian, a lot of narrative therapy, a lot of focus on sacred story. Some of the other groups that I was part of, I was involved with a group called Tribal Hearth, which used Joseph Campbell's story, monomyth, as a ritual basis. So a lot of focus on story. And that, in essence, brought back to my own story, to focus on my own story. So I've actually, as of last week, I am now a part of the British Association of Counselling Psychotherapy. And so over the next year, my goal is to build a clientele in the UK, so that I can move and it not be destructive. It's been very good that way. Mm-hmm.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So, I mean, in addition to, so you joined the Order through podcast. I take it that's how you found OBOD. Okay. And when you went into that dark place, have there been times in your life that Druidry has helped you and supported you, or what brought you out of that dark place?
Absolutely. A lot of by the time I came to Druidry, I was already on the route out of that dark place. So in 2015, I started actually getting out, and I'd been working with my parents. They own a small business over here, so I'd been working for them and living at home. And then in 2015, when I started to really reinvigorate my spirituality, I started to kind of branch out. But it was Druidry that really gave me a lot of the understanding and the exercises that would allow me to focus on my own story. You would ask me like yesterday when we first met, if I had written any poetry or anything like that. And unfortunately, over the past couple of years, because of something we'll also be talking about later on, I haven't had a chance to get into writing prose in that way. But really the focus on personal story, and a lot of the figures in British mythology I really connected with. Figures like Lle from the Mabinogi. That idea of being lost, the idea of Lle up in the tree, being hurt and being lost and being confused, and I really connected with that.
Can you, for those who may not know, can you just give us a little synopsis of Lle?
So Lle Llaw Gyffes is the husband of the son of Erenrod, and he was rejected by her and taken by his uncle Gwydion, who taught him, and through various means were able to gain a name, an epithet, and weapons from Erenrod, who had placed what's called, I wish Mara Starling was here, she would be able to tell me what the word is. She placed a curse on her own child, so that only she was able to give him a name, which is very important. A weapon, very important.
We call that a gesh. In Irish, we call that a gesh.
I want to say it's called a llenget. But I'm not.
Any Welsh speakers who are viewing, maybe we can be enlightened. And in Irish we'd call it a gesh, and that comes in that taboo or that constriction or constraint. Go on anyway. Sorry.
Absolutely, yes. So and that reappears again and again throughout the four branches and through other sources, right? So Gwydion was able to trick her every time in order for her to give this child a name, a weapon, and eventually a wife too. So she said, you will never be able to get married. Gwydion then built, constructed, charmed, created Blodeuwyn, who eventually became Blodeuwedd. the flower-faced goddess, and Lle married Bledawef, and it was not a happy marriage. There's a lot of stuff connected to that, but he was eventually wounded, and he turned into an eagle and flew up into a tree and was going to die unless Gwydion was able to get him down. And a lot of those pieces of being lost are really connected with.
Is that Malecht? Is that the word?
Malecht?
No, that's somebody. Brian puts that up. I don't know if that meant your.
Oh, I see. No, Malecht sounds like Gaelic to me.
Well, actually, Malacht is a curse in Irish.
Okay.
But that's what I wondered. Okay. Anyway, sorry to cut across you there.
Oh no, it's okay. And so those reconnecting with these figures that I could also take ownership of, not ownership in direct power over, but around that time I was connected and I was involved very heavily with Santeria Lukumi, and it's a whole culture in itself. It's for those who don't know what it is. It's the Afro-Cuban version of the Yoruba Nigerian traditional religion, worshipping and working with the Orishas. So my godfather, it was a kind of a family structure. My godfather was a priest of Oshun, and a lot of the pieces around that were very much based in Afro-Cuban Yoruba culture. And as a white person in those traditions, I had to be very not careful, because it was all welcoming, but I had to be very conscious that I was still not a part of that community unless you initiate it, right? So I was really yearning for something that connected me with my ancestral connection, my ancestral story, and a lot of the work in that was ancestral work. And so my ancestors, of course, were all in the UK and in Ireland, right? So how do I then connect with ancestors when I'm not there, and I'm also working with spirits that are not connected to my ancestors either? What do I do with that? So Druidry really helped to fit that piece there.
That was mine. My similar story. I worked with a medicine woman from the US and Tanzania, and had initiations, and it was wonderful. But I could get the nature connect, but it wasn't for my own landscape until I discovered Druidry. So I can understand the same frustrations. But it's great that you were able to find it.
Absolutely, and it's an ongoing process too. I don't regret my time with those other traditions. They fed a different part of my soul, but a big part of my soul is in the misty landscape of literally where parts of my body were created, right? So it's...
And I think it's good to look at all of this, because they can provide doorways or keys, or oases, or resting stops in your path on the road to discover a place for yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? And then there's always elements that have things in common.
Oh, completely. Well, and this is what I really came to understand. So Lukumi really equipped me with an understanding of the spirit world. And some of the experiences, I don't feel comfortable talking too much about them, particularly right now, but some of my experiences really underscored for me that many of the spirits and the beings that we're connecting with through our spiritual traditions on this level are all connected and all know of each other up there. And there is definitely an idea in Afro-Cuban and Caribbean traditions, a spiritism, that they're all working with each other to push people where they need to be. And I really did think that my time with Lukumi was to give me the healing that I needed.
Yep.
In order to then present me back to being in the best place I could be, both psychologically and spiritually, to then connect again with my home,
Yeah. I see Gabriella says, perhaps creating stories without pain and then would lead to a world without pain. I don't agree. I think we grow through pain. I'm not suggesting we go looking for it, but and then So Nima says, I find sometimes seeing the trials in a myth can help me to heal and progress.
Yeah.
Liz says, pain is a teacher, neither good nor bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think yeah, I mean, I think if everything is sweet, there's no reason to move. There's no need to get up in the morning. You know, that pain actually is a good motivator. It's like you can wave a flag.
Mm-hmm.
We have a word, and people have heard this before, a word in Irish called dhush, which means a prize or a reward.
Mm.
It also means trial and sorrow, so that you have about looking for the prize or the gift in pain and in trial. That they're maybe two sides of the same coin. So
Yes, I very much agree. I really do think, in my own personal gnosis and what I've experienced in some of the traditions I've been following, that the world, the manifest world, is a place of experience, because so many of the spirit beings I've connected with are so desperate to get into this space again, because it's a place of experience, different experiences, but pain is one of those pieces, but also growth is one of those experiences too. And so it works very well with my work in psychotherapy and in counseling, because again, these mythic stories, I saw a comment about mythic stories here. There is a connection, there's a relationship there between what the gods, the spirits, the deities, the saints, whoever go through, and how we can relate to them. And indeed, one of the way that story comes into Lukumi and Santeria is the mythos is not understood as actually have happened, but as fables and parables in order to teach us. And most of the Orishas, most of these spirits have spent time on Earth living human lives. And so many of the stories come from their experiences of pain, of suffering. Oshun, for example, is she's the goddess of love, the Orisha of love, but also of pain, because you can't have love without pain. You can't have love without that deep despair that comes from bad love, from the jealousy that can come about from love. And so she's the Orisha of sweet and sour waters too, of honey and of vinegar.
Yeah, I mean, Deborah says, what if we think that because it's that's mechanism machismo that's now here. These are old themes. I mean, the pain of childbirth followed by the joy. That there's I think it's important, and there are ancient traditions going way, 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 way back into mother traditions as well, that we grow through pain.
Yeah. I
think it's constant suffering is the problem. If you're staying stuck there, it's about learning through pain. If you don't learn, then there's a problem with that.
Very much.
But it's about being able to, so does it hurt the seed when it germinates? It may do if something is bursting. I don't know. Can you gain wisdom through physical pain or just psychological pain? Hannah asked that question. Well, I know I used to work with women who were 5 years post breast cancer, who were working as volunteers, supporting women with breast cancer. And so during their training, I was asking them, was there anything they learned from their cancer? And they said it was a gift.
Yes.
It was a wake-up call that in that paradoxical, counterintuitive way, that they appreciated it. They wouldn't wish it on anybody, but that they could learn from it. And that was physical as well as psychological. I don't think you could separate the two.
I was going to say, I don't think you can separate the two. I think it depends on how you respond or react. But sometimes going through that trauma will develop you. And that doesn't mean that it had to have happened. But we are all products of everything we've been through. And depending on kind of how we react or respond to something that's happened to us and that journey of getting to that place, I think it depends. And it all comes back to story too. As a fellow therapist, you probably work with narrative as well. You understand, like we work with these narratives with clients, and when a client is sat in front of us and the core belief underneath is either a healthy or unhealthy one, creating the narrative that somebody is living their life through and with, and what they're able to connect with or not connect with, is very telling, and that will perpetuate issues in their life, right?
Yeah. I think Gabrielle is still thinking on. I think we can grow also in the absence of pain, suffering, even if there are people who go through. I don't know how we can avoid pain. I mean, if we've ever been rejected, you haven't been chosen for the team, you didn't do well and you failed an exam, your dog has died. If we're actually living a real life, as in a normal life, we encounter pain and grief. I don't think anyone gets away with it. So that teaches us, and I think that can really, really help us, because we cannot avoid it. We cannot avoid life events that causes sadness. So.
I mean, I wouldn't, the type of traumas that I've dealt with in my life, and I'll be honest with you, like moving to Canada was one of the worst things that happened to me, because it was one of the first times in my life that major control had been taken away from me, and I felt like I was being punished for something. And when I came to Canada, I was being bullied for being different.
Yep.
For being an immigrant kid, for having an accent, for being a little different, because I also have a learning disability, for being gay, for being witch, for all of these various things. Every single time, that entrenched in me the idea that I don't have power. And unfortunately, what that did was it created this narrative in my head that I don't have any control in my life. So because of that, I was hands off. And I unfortunately hurt people in my life, very close people in my life, because I was trying to gain a sense of control and power in my life, right? And that messed me up until just recently, only a couple of years ago, that I started to put that into perspective and change that narrative. Because if I was able to hurt somebody that was very close to me, that meant that I actually did have power. And that meant I had responsibility. And if I have responsibility, then I get to change the narrative. I get to work. I can have a hand in my own life, right?
Era says, grief is the price of love. I agree with you. I mean, I'm very familiar with grief, and I was, one of the consoling things was that this grief was the price I was paying for the love I had, but it was worth it. And that was really important. Ferdy, if we keep avoiding pain, we cut ourselves off from vulnerability and the opportunity for great joy, but we need a balance. And I suppose when you talk about love and relationships, it is about being vulnerable.
It is.
And not always that need for control. But there's the risk. Because when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you open up opportunities, but you open yourself up to whatever. And Gabrielle, fair dues to you. She says her tiara is not shaken. So it's wonderful, yes. So Philip says, I always say grief is because we live. It is, we experience loss.
It's true.
Right through our lifetime. And like you say, loss of a home that you knew, or a loss of a job, people, pets. You're a strong body, if you get sick, all of those kind of things. And Gunter says, what resonates? If the goddesses love you, they'll send you challenges.
Well, and this is the thing, right? And I see that particularly in my role as counselor. If somebody comes and sits in my chair and wants to be coddled and wants to, work on making their life perfect, then I'm curious about what's been happening in their life, right? And I flat out say, I'm not here to coddle you. I'm not here to just give you love. First of all, it's inappropriate to give your clients love. But I think compassion, that's where I'm at with that question. It's more about compassion than it is about love. And compassion sometimes is being hard, holding up the mirror to somebody so that they can see things for themselves, challenging in the right moment, right? But also,
and it's the right moment when it's safe enough for the person to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Francis says, I think the ways a person deals with grief as an adult may also depend on whether or not there are significant traumas from childhood and the burden carried as a result. Absolutely. Some more than others. Grief from childhood may also be ancestral. Absolutely.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. There's that running joke amongst therapists where it's like, a therapist is writing on their pad with somebody in the chair, and it's mother, right?
Say that again.
Mother, underlined many times. It's the mother, underlined. Right. Yeah. But it's true. It is that piece around a lot of stuff comes from childhood, and I don't think we realize fully how much stuff starts in childhood and how much stuff is ancestral in nature also, because it comes down through the family culture. None of us come in as a clean slate, because as soon as we're born, we're born into a context that has already been in existence since 3 or 4 generations back, right? And talking about like ancestral work. So my book is around ancestral work, and that's a key piece into that, working with the ancestors to understand, well, what did they hand us? In my family, I'm still living with a core narrative that was developed in the 1840s in Northern England, that is, you have to be a self-made person. And I'm still seeing that in workaholism amongst my family members, right? That was like 5 generations ago, Yeah.
And the thing about workaholism, as opposed to a substance addiction, gets far more affirmation, because it's seen as a good thing, and it actually, in many ways, it's adaptive, it works, it's successful, but there is a price.
Yes.
You won't starve, you won't lose the roof over your head. However, there's other things that may be lost. Clinty says, I heard a wonderful phrase that was, if you are lucky, you will live a life where you die 100 times before you truly do.
Yeah.
It reminded me of the little deaths we all experience from endings. Yes, and absolutely. Those wonderful little stories, I think, is a wonderful, makes life very, very rich.
It's
because
true.
you pick up again, and when we talk about that life, death, rebirth cycle, is that we have those mini deaths, and then something is reborn to help us going on. And I suppose, if people have had trauma, the best revenge is to do well, and that you thrive rather than sit long in surviving. So
yeah, absolutely. And I like your word revenge there, because in many ways it is that the idea of revenge often keeps us stuck in place, but sometimes the best revenge is just moving forward, right? And allowing then the other person to move forward too. How often do we see the more unhealthy form of revenge, which is to keep the other person in place in your mind because you're not ready to move forward yet. I'm not going to forgive you because I need you to still be villain, because I'm not comfortable or I'm not ready to move forward yet and let go. It's narrative, right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I remember working with somebody who was very, very angry from having some trauma, and just stuck. And I asked the question, I said, can you imagine your life if you weren't angry? And she stopped and she said, but then who would I be?
Well, who would I be, right?
And it's really hard how we, our identity and, allowing events to define us, which is fine if you've, you say, I've come from, I had perfect parents, gave me the 3 core conditions and everything was wrong. That defines me. But it's when actually, no, I'm defined by the pain I've had, and that I'm never going to let it go, because I hold on to this. It's and then you stay stuck, and that's the pity.
And it's true. I found that I found myself falling into that trap recently too, and I had to sit down and I had to think about myself and my move to the UK again, move home, right?
Yeah.
When I get over there, I fixated so much on moving home the past 30 years, 28 years, right? I fixated so much on that my identity here has been, I'm a British guy who is, all these things, right? But British is one of the major pieces, because over here I wasn't British until I came to Canada, if that makes sense, right?
You're Welsh?
Welsh.
Okay.
So when I go over to the UK next year, well, who am I suddenly? Because I'll be surrounded by my people, right? I'll be surrounded by people who sound like me, or well, somewhat sound like me. Right? So, but then that's the question: who am I going to be? And I think that, I've been seeing that with a lot of clients too, similar to what the example you brought up. Who am I? Who will I be if I don't give up? If I give this up, right? Yeah.
That's right. And wait a second.
These comments are coming fast and furious. Wow.
Lots of unconditional love. The quality of Era, I think I don't know if Era or Ira is how to pronounce your name. The only qualitative difference between good and bad addiction seems to be the level of social acceptability. Drugs unacceptable, work commendable. Absolutely, and I think you can be really trapped in that. Anyway, so I mean, there are things that we do that can actually be effective, except in when you do too much of it.
Yes.
Then that's when it becomes, I suppose, pathological or has fallout or people suffer. So, yeah.
It's true. It's true. It's true. And those addictions, can take on some very interesting forms. You know, I've seen people who become addicted to spirituality.
Yeah.
I've seen people who've become addicted to whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be an unhealthy thing, but it's how do you then take whatever it is up, if it's used in a healthy or unhealthy way, right? And that's part of people's journeys. And I think that for me, that's been a big lesson the past 5 years, is to understand that wherever anybody is, that's where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you cook?
I do.
So I know you cook up stories. We'll come back to those in a minute. So on the physical plane, what do you cook? I don't know why I have this down. So
because you asked me yesterday, like, so what do you do? Do you do anything? Like, so I said, I cook. You know, I like cooking. I like cooking. It's not a huge part of my life, except I do enjoy cooking. But I make a mean fried rice, which is pretty good.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on from cooking because you have a story to tell.
Yes, I do. So I actually have several stories, if I'm allowed. They're short stories, though. But somebody was asking about the book. So I'll put a link in later on when I'm coming up. It's available in September. It's all on ancestor veneration. And that's really a lot of the work I've been doing the past couple of years. Most of my writing has been academic or on this 80,000 word behemoth. But every so often I am able to get back into my creativity. And a lot of the little stories that I've been writing, they tend to focus on kind of what I'm going through in any given moment, right? That's really how the Arwen comes through. A lot of my druid work with stories is around narrative and around delivering and that relationship as a storyteller. But as a story creator, every so often something will just come through and it just needs to be given birth. And that's how I see story creation, as giving birth, right? So I have 2 stories and then a little part of a ritual that I'm building for myself for next year when I go home. You'll see kind of the inspiration, who is Khalil Gibran. I really love his style of writing and his way of reading. So I have 2 little stories and then a little tiny paragraph. I think I'll start with this one here. Okay, there we go. Get it over. Now, those of you who have been on the OBOD Facebook group, you may recognize some of these if you've interacted with me. But for those of you who are new, I hope you enjoy this. So this one is called The Man. It was on the 15th day of the month of Javaran, that special day set aside for prostrations towards the east and celebrations marking the victory of Mahasatyan the Quick over Kalarajit the Proud, that a lone figure appeared in the town. He came from the north, that dark and brooding direction of death and cold. He was robed in hopelessness. He walked upon shoes of fear. He refreshed himself in tears of despair and ate only the fruits of ineptitude. None would dare speak with him, but he would speak to all. None would dare approach him, though he cast his gaze on everybody. The people whispered to each other as the man hobbled through the streets, shooing their children inside and closing their doors. Finally, as the scorching sun was on high in the sky, and while shading beneath a yew tree, a child did approach the figure. "Mother says you are a bad man," said the child. "Your mother has known many bad men," he replied. "Father says you'd steal all our dreams," remarked the child. "Your father lost his dreams many years ago," said the man. "My brother says you make him sad." "Sadness is a constant companion to your brother," the man replied. There was a slight pause, and the man looked at the child and asked, "What do you see?" And the child shrugged. Just a man." And with that, they picked themselves up off the ground and skipped away, on to the next adventure. The man smiled to himself, and picking himself up, he moved on to the next town. Okay. So the second is, I got this image of a monk in the forest, and this story popped into my head. The monk and the Lord's son. Once, long ago, there lived a monk, cloistered in a hermitage in a forest a few hours' walk from a majestic castle. The lord who lived at the castle was a powerful but humble man, and he sent offerings from his kitchens to the monk regularly to support the hermitage. Day in and day out, the monk rose to greet the sun. He prostrated to the four corners, saluted the winds, and prayed for the salvation of the entire world. He meditated on the bliss of absolute love and watched as the world changed and grew around him. The lord of the castle would sometimes send his youngest son to take the offerings, some loaves of bread and sacks of meal, fish and rounds of cheese. The boy was strong and on the verge of manhood, but unlike his father, was proud and arrogant. "Hail, my son, and hail your noble father, that the Lord doth bless him," the monk would say upon spotting the boy riding close, accepting with full gratitude the provisions. At first the boy was polite, but soon grew irritated with the chore of going to the monk. He did not see the hermit's way to be anything worthy of respect, for he had his sights on knighthood and glory. "What you do all day is a waste, old man. This food should be given to those who can fight and defend the kingdom." And the monk would smile and nod. Yes, I'm sure it should." "You pray all day and do nothing productive. I'm going to be a strong warrior and fight our enemies." And the monk would smile and nod, saying, "A mighty warrior you will be indeed," and thank the boy. Then the boy would depart, and the monk would go back to his prostrations and his prayer. And when night came, it was time to sleep. The monk would lay down his head and dream of the battles that he too once fought. He would hear the screams of his enemies and see the blood of the slain from his battles. And then one day war did come, and the young knight did go off to war. The battles were fierce. The shouts of anguish from those both guilty and innocent cried out into the night. But after a time, the battles were fought and won, and peace came to the kingdom again. The monk, who had continued to prostrate, to pray, and to focus on the salvation of the entire world, was oblivious to the fight, and one day he spied a new visitor. This was not the peasant the Lord often sent with his rations, but a grizzled warrior back from war. Aged from rough living while on campaign, scarred and disfigured from battle, and with a walk of humble bearing. "Hello, sir," said the knight. "I am the son of the local lord back from war. I wonder if I may come and sit by your fire for a time." And from that time onwards, there were 2 monks.
Wow. That's
and
lovely.
then, so the last little piece I'd like to share is part of a ritual that I'm crafting for myself for next year when I go home, and how inspiration tends to come to me is, some people see it in dreams, some people get just inspired to sit down and write. For me, it's usually visions. I get images in my head that I just fixate on, and then words start to come to me, and it does feel like a birthing process. And so I have this image of myself climbing a very special place in North Wales, the Great Orme, which is just next to Llandudno on the north coast of North Wales. And I have these words to express kind of what that process will be like for me. So, ritual of return. And I did make pilgrimage to the summit of my heart. And there, surrounded by friends new and old, did I bow down to the altar of potential. Here I am, I declare. Here you have always been, is the reply. And taking up the hammer of destiny, I do forge my future. And taking up the flute of creation, do I make the music of my heart. And the song of my soul mingles with the song of the land, and I know I am home. Whew.
Well, I'm going to read some comments. That was wonderful, Ben. Thank you. I was completely drawn in and taken away by your storytelling. Applauses. Love that. These stories feel like fables. So wonderful for inspiring inner work and growth. And Stephanie suggests that The Knight and the Monk could be a movie. Jackie says, lovely, Ben. Love your storytelling. That one gave me goosebumps. Beautiful. I love your storytelling. The child in me is captivated by the tales. This is an ancient wisdom in them, or there is an ancient wisdom. That's from Philippa. It's lovely to get that kind of feedback, isn't it? Beautiful, super nice.
So much
Well done. Now, a poet too, gorgeous and such vivid imagery. So you say this thing comes to you, you're one of your inspiration or imas. Mm-hmm. So are you like walking down the street? Are you in nature, or are you sitting in front of your screen, or what is it?
Absolutely. It tends to be when I'm feeling very strong emotions. So when that strong emotional, whatever is being triggered, and sometimes that can be if I see an image, if I'm in my head, something will come to me. Even if it's just I'm feeling really a strong emotion, a homesickness, a hraif, or a sense of like extreme love. When I'm meditating, and I'm not, when I say meditating, I'm not sitting cross-legged, like, just getting into my head and being in that space where that perception expands. And then these characters come to me, and I try to run back to try and put it down to paper.
Well, I'm always interested in this. So, Ira says, thanks so much for sharing these inspired pieces. So fascinating. Lovely stories. They sound from another time. Okay. And Poppy saying, does the whole story come to you at once? Because for me, my stories is I tell them to myself. They come. I can't write them down first. Mm-hmm. I have to tell them over and over again. And then I record them. And then I write them.
Right.
And I find that so I can tell a story and I write it down. And then I tell it again, and more stuff comes as I'm telling. I don't know if you're familiar with that process, or yours very different.
I would say that it depends. My storytelling has definitely evolved. I do have stories. I've written stories ever since I was a kid, and I can tell that when I started to really work on myself and open myself up and connect in, about, I would say, over the past 7 years, it's really evolved to be a birthing process. One of the major kind of figures in my understanding of myself as a storyteller is a gentleman named Brian Walsh, who is a storyteller in Ontario here, and a very prolific storyteller. He works with mostly the Irish. He comes from the Irish diaspora. And the way he explained and talked about and allowed me to put two and two together, that relationship between storyteller and story told, who you're telling the story to, it's a birthing process into them, right? So something happens where it downloads, but the more I've worked on myself and the clearer that relationship has taken place. Usually it's the image first, and then I'm scrambling to find the right words to express it. So the feeling lingers there, the image lingers there, and so then I'm using this language and this style that I've developed in order to then translate it. And sometimes it does feel like I have it, then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I'll come back to it and it'll be like, no, that word isn't really what it is. And so I'll change it, but it's always in there, just waiting to be translated.
So are you ever in a tour with a live audience storytelling?
Mostly in the baking community in Ontario here. So a lot of my storytelling work has mostly been within the baking community. So around the fire, around the bardic circle. I do want to get into telling story and having that relationship with live audience. I have actually done some work online. So a couple of years ago, during the pandemic, I was offering storytelling through my YouTube channel and as live events. Something I developed was an interesting 40-minute meditation using ASMR as a technique to The Old Woman in the Woods, which is one of the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales, as an experiential for listeners. So really placing them into the story, written in such a way. But of course, clarity. And this is another big thing about my story too. I was born with dyspraxia, which caused me to not be able to speak when I was a kid. And so when I was in North Wales, I went through extensive speech therapy with a woman, a Welsh woman, whose accent is where I got my accent from. And so being able to clearly express through storytelling has been a journey for me. So even to be able to, talk about it here is a huge thing for me. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Lots of moving pieces, Eimear. There's so many pieces to my life. I don't even know who I am half the time.
Well, it's interesting because of the pandemic. A lot of storytelling has gone online, and they've continued, because I'm involved in a number of storytelling circles online and meeting, some every week, some once a month, to if you're interested in any links, I can give them to you. Where you tell a 5-minute story or 10-minute story, and it's just lovely. And so I was in Marrakesh. It was an international storytelling festival. So there were 87 tellers from all over the world: Canada, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa. And it was just magical to see, and lots of Moroccan storytellers. It was there's been a long tradition of storytelling in the main square in Marrakesh, and it began to die down. So there were campaigns to get intangible World Heritage status for storytelling in the main square, and they did. Wow. So they've kind of the square for storytelling has been reclaimed. But it's just wonderful to have tellers from all over the world, plus local Moroccan tellers telling together. And we had a 50-hour telethon, broke the world record. Unfortunately, it wasn't observed by the record people, but
it did look amazing. So I'm actually on the Facebook page for the Guild of Storytelling for the UK, and I was seeing some of the other storytellers that were there posting pictures. And it's funny because every so often you would appear in one of the background. It was like, oh, I know them.
You're in there, yeah. So
it's amazing. Yeah,
it was great. It was just brilliant.
Yeah.
Tracy says, I've always been able to write, and my bardic training is bringing stories to me prolifically. What I need to develop is your ease at sharing them aloud confidently as you do. That's hard for me. Tracy, I spent 7 years in the bardic grade. I know this is maybe it's directed at Ben. For my own story, I wasn't a bard. Like Howard, my husband, he was spitting out poetry all the time, and I felt I'm not a bard. I was doing Ovates things. And then I'd handed in my Druid review, and I was at a gathering of shamans, and I started telling stories. So it wasn't until I had finished my bardic grade that I started telling stories, which is really interesting. And then in my Ovates grade, I took up the harp. So it's you do it by just doing it. Just start in a safe place to tell your story. It happens with practice and with nice people who are interested in your stories, who can listen. Because it's very, very hard to tell a story if you haven't got good listeners around you. It really, really needs good listeners. So.
And I find that if you have the emotional connection to the story, for me at least, that really makes a difference between me just reciting text and me telling a story. If I didn't have the same emotional connection, like the two stories I just told, I know what it's like to be clothed in hopelessness. I know what it's like to walk on eggshells of fear. I know what it's like to be shunned by people in my community. I know what that's like. So to that image of the man coming, and then the innocence of youth, that, you know, unbridled by, you know, unbridled by ego, unbridled by bias, to be approached like that. I can tell that story and feel it, right? And some of the most amazing storytellers in the world, look at Maya Angelou, right? We don't have an emotional connection to what we're saying. And oftentimes for me, that's an ancestral connection. Then I think that it can be a little stunted. And I think the audience knows that, you know, at least that's been my experience.
Yeah. I think so. So Brian says, how can we reach out to you? Do you have a website, Ben? You do. I'm going to put it
yes,
in.
I do, yes. So a brand new website, just came up with it a few weeks ago. It's benstimpson.com. So that's where you can find more about my Ancestral Whispers book that I'm putting out in September. You can learn more about me in general, a little bit about my story, and some of my other offerings too.
Brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Ian.
So, okay, you Brian, I just wanted that. Brilliant.
Oh, here. Hi, Philip.
Who?
Oh, Philip.
No.
Okay.
It's on Philip's YouTube channel. So it's on my YouTube, Philip OBODs, and the OBOD Facebook. So this is going out live on 4 different streams. So Philip says, your life experience has given you this ability to create these stories. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And let's underline that. All of the people listening to this, all of your life experiences are informing your stories. So tell those stories. Clint, I was talking to Clint. Clint's in the comments there. He was on a couple of weeks ago, and he said something amazing yesterday to me, and I want to honor that. He said, you need to tell your story because nobody else will. And it's very true. You need to tell your story.
Tell your own story because nobody else
will.
Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Tracy says, thank you both. I will try and find a receptive, safe space to practice. Absolutely. You know what I do? I tell myself in the mirror. I walk on the roads and I tell my story and I fine tune it. Mm-hmm. And then I have places where I can do it. But I started off in my own home telling stories, and then somebody said, that's really good. I mean, it's nice to get feedback, and then you start doing it elsewhere. And what is it? Brian says, I'm a member of the 6-Word Story Club.
I don't know what that is.
Neither do I. It would be interesting to know what a story in 6 words. Brilliant. Unless these are, I have no idea.
Oh, that would be cool. Like the Twitter, is it a Twitter story club? Like you're limited to 6? That would be kind of cool. Yeah.
I don't know. Is it like a story, like a haiku? Except you've 5 lines in haiku. Is it 5 lines or 3 lines? Oh, I can't remember. And anyway, Clinty says, "Oh, I love you, sugar." That's just a nice.
I love you too, Clinty. I love you too. Yeah.
Brilliant. So, your book.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what it's about. You've made a few references to it, so it's coming out in autumn.
That's time.
And the title is, what's the title?
So the title is Ancestral Whispers, a guide to building ancestral veneration practices. And this has been, again, as I've said, it's been part of my story over the past many years now, and reconnecting with ancestral tradition. And so I started putting together an 8-week course for my psychotherapy clients, and it was around building ancestral veneration. A lot of my clients are in various spiritualities. I work in spiritual counseling, so it's part and parcel of that. And I noticed that a lot of the books out there, not to denigrate them, but a lot of the books out there are either they're connected to one specific tradition, or they are so generalized that for me, they didn't have any substance, right? So for me, what I was seeing was, how do you build ancestral connections without necessarily taking on somebody else's tradition that you don't belong to? But then how do you honor that want and that need to connect in a way that isn't tied to perhaps, previous religious trauma or traditions that you don't belong to anymore because of religious trauma or coming out? So I started playing around with this, and the 8 weeks I had some amazing people as part of the course, So I started putting that together in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, so I delivered it online. And at the time, my supervisor in town here, my friend Tiffany, who's a Llewellyn author herself, I sat down with her and I said, I would like to turn this into a book. What's your journey? So she gave me advice on how to build this into a publishable book. So then I spent 8 months developing this, and I turned it into what it is now. So the essence of the book is basically one big long therapy session. It is not my job to give people rituals, ways of doing their ancestral work. I'm not telling people what to do, but I'm asking them good questions. So the book is focused, and the first part is around how do we conceptualize ancestors? How do we conceptualize these from your own spiritual background that makes sense for that background, but also can go deeper? Are they archetypal? Are they literal spirits? How do you see, where do you fit into various different worldviews? So I took examples from many different worldwide traditions, and so I'm asking the question, what do you believe? I'm giving you all of these examples. Which ones speak true for how you already see these ancestors? And then we move into the practicalities of a lived ancestral practice. What is the rituals looking like? What is the use of space looking like? How are you connecting with elements here? And also, how are your ancestors connecting with these? If you're a druid and you're building an ancestral practice around your druidry, how does your great aunt Ingrid, who was, Methodist and, not interested in all this woo stuff, how is she going to connect with this, right? How are you connecting with ancestors from 1,000 years ago? How are you connected with ancestors? So for me, I come from a mixed background. In the past 4 generations, I have literally Irish, Cornish, Welsh, English, and Scottish in me, right? How do I, as working with all of my ancestors, then connect with all of these disparate branches that at times were at odds with each other?
Yeah.
Right? So that's really the basis of the book. Many journal questions, many good questions, I think. And it's funny because as I was writing the book, asking these questions, I had to sit back and really question myself on these things too. And in the process of writing this book, I actually deepened my relationship with my ancestors too.
Brilliant. Jackie, who did the course, that course he offered was so good and gave me a lot of food for thought. And she said she learned a lot in it. So that's wonderful. And Sandy has a question. I love listening to stories filled with genuine emotional experience. I love the title of your new book. Have you considered doing a podcast of your stories and experiences?
I actually started doing a podcast a couple of years ago, but it was other people's stories. So I haven't quite gotten to developing anything of mine yet. But there are some podcast episodes out there where I've been a guest. The podcast that I put together was Essence podcast, and I actually had quite a few OBOD people because I was connected. So if you're interested, I had David Bard on there, I had Andrew Anderson on there, Clinty was on there, and a couple of other really cool people. There was only 14 episodes, but I'm going to get back to it. But it was that essence story, the essential story. So I haven't done anything for myself yet. Mainly because I've been so focused writing this book that's coming out. It's a 2-year process, and if any of you are thinking of writing a book, it's absolute hell, I'll tell you now.
So what what has been your greatest achievement, or the thing that you're most proud of?
I think it's the life that I'm living right now. That's been my greatest achievement. In 2014, I was living at home. I was still in a full-on depression. I was a college dropout, and I was still in so much pain. And I worked very, 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 very hard to get out of that. And And I do believe that there was a spiritual hand in all of that too. But the life that I'm living now, like I'm on the verge of completing my bachelor's. I'm actually exploring master's programs in the UK for next September. I'm moving over there. I retrained in psychotherapy, and I'm somebody who I would have wanted to have been 7 years ago. So I think that's my biggest achievement, and that legacy that I'm building for myself is something that I can be very proud of. I often, when I was in the midst of that depression all those years ago, something I started doing was vlogging online, and I had this sense, because I really hated myself from 10 years before. I had this sense that if I could be the person that in 10 years' time I could be proud of now, maybe I could be proud of the person I didn't like 10 years before. And now I'm getting into that place where I'm really proud of who I was 7 years ago. And I know that in 7 years' time, I'm going to be hella proud of who I am now. Yeah.
What a wonderful way of putting it, that, and it's honoring that part of you or the person you were that you didn't like. Because I mean, I think self-dislike it's not unusual. It's not rare. And to be able to honor that part, and that bad part of you that you didn't like is the part that got you to where you are today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, the resilience and the wisdom and the determination to push through all that, you know, that dark cloud or whatever you want to describe it, that not nice person did all the work and got you to where you are. So it's so, so important to honor that other person. And
Absolutely.
it's just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in many ways, when we look at the stories of the gods, for example, I think it's a very similar relationship. You know, if the gods can be proud of us as we are mere mortals, and we can be proud of the gods for the things that they've taught us, then we can find the gods inside ourselves, you know, in a purely psychotherapeutic, archetypal sort of way, right? Yeah.
And it just strikes me, I suppose hindsight's great, you know, looking back.
Great, yeah.
But when we're in this position where we are now and not happy with us now, either the person we are or the situation we're in, and then to be able to say, okay, right now I'm just in a horrible place, but I'm going to trust that in 10 years time, I'm going to look back and say, wow, you were in a horrible place and you came out of it, well done. But I think that takes a lot of trust, particularly, and really challenging, particularly when you're in that place where nothing's going right and you're not going right. You
Absolutely.
know?
Absolutely. And I think that also in truth comes back to kind of that experiential piece too. You know, I didn't have enough life experience 10 years ago to be able to put things into perspective. Right. I have life experience now. In 10 years time, though, is going to be a new experience. You know, the model that I see time through is as a spiral. I come back to the same position, but it's not the same place. So I have that discernment then. But of course, I'm in a different place in my life too, right? And another key piece there, and I'm glad that it came up too, is that trust piece. And you know, I've had some amazing experiences with the concept of weird, of fate, of destiny over the past 7 years, I should say, to the like inexplicable experiences. And you know, we don't have time to go into them all now, but you know, when I said before that there was a spiritual hand in my life, I do believe in. So as a reminder, I actually got this tattooed onto me, and it's the web of weird, that idea of we're all connected, and that, you know, one string moved here will affect other strings in the same way that other people's lives interact us. So that in many ways, Druidry affected me in that way, to see myself as part of a much larger web of experience. And that allows me to have a lot more trust, because being in tune with this now, I get the feeling that something big is happening in my life, and my ego needs to just get out of the way so that I can open the road, right?
It's interesting how often we get in our own way. And I'm very familiar with that, but I'm easy spotted in other people. And I'm very encouraging to other people, and yet I could do it myself as well.
It's a very, very, very common therapist issue, though, isn't it, really?
Oh, yeah. So can you describe, what does the word weird mean to you?
Of course, definitely. So weird comes from the Anglo-Saxon. It's connected to Urd, which is the northern Scandinavian and Germanic way of seeing the web that interconnects everything. So for me in particular, how I've started to feel, well, I haven't started the past 7 years. I've come to realize the connections in the same way that synchronicity happens, the Jungian idea of synchronicity. So I have responsibility of my life, but my life is also intersected by everybody else, right? And that interconnection also affects my life. So in a way, it comes back to the idea of karma. What I'm putting out in will come back to me, but in different ways. I think it's also about being in tune with that feeling of something bigger than myself, getting out of that sense of individuality and moving into interconnectivity, right? And it's not just a psychological understanding. It's for me, it's an experiential feeling inside my body. In 2016, I had a situation where 7 people came back into my life. All of them men, all of them I had some sort of unfinished business with, and we were all connected emotionally to me through either I had fallen in love with them, or they had fallen in love with me, or something. It was emotional. And
7 men in 1 year came back into your life. 7 men in the 1 year. Wow.
Inexplicable. And in many ways I needed them all to come back into my life, whether it was for me to be healed or for them to be healed. And by the end of that, the absolute love of my life came back into my life, and it was an unrequited love of my life.
Oh, and did they stay?
No, but that he was in my life for a few years. And I think we were almost like eddies. We were kind of fighting off of each other. We both needed to release each other.
Okay.
And we did. And in that process, we both healed. But it was inexplicable. Like the weirdest things, like I can't even, like they would, like one popped up randomly on a new friend's Facebook. And I was like, I recognize that name. And I hadn't seen this person in almost 10 years. Another person I met at a random pagan festival, and I hadn't seen them in about 10 years. One of them was somebody who, when I was at a much more immature phase of my life, I was 18, and he was considerably older. He was in his late 20s, and he had emotionally hurt me because he just suddenly dropped me. And that caused a lot of anger for me, of course, the rejection piece, right? And I held him in my head for 10 years. Bitterness, that I'm not understanding why was he rejecting me, all this and all the other. And he was one of the people that popped up on a new friend's Facebook page who I had met at tribal hearth gathering, and all these little pieces, right? And I reached out to him and I said, do you remember me? He said, I'm sorry, I don't remember you. And I was like, you really hurt me about 10 years ago. And he said, I was a very different person back then, and I want to apologize. And the bitterness and I realized how much I had been holding on to for 10 years.
And he had let that go. I mean, wow.
So that's why you hear about these synchronicities all the time. Like there's a couple in China who they'd been married a few years, and they were looking through old photos, and suddenly the guy saw himself in his wife's picture from this random tourist point, and this was years before they'd met each other. And she went and got the same picture, and they could see each other in each other's pictures, and they had no idea, they'd never met each other before, and they didn't know each other for years. That to me is that
wow.
Weird. It's weird, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Timey says this holistic way to see one's own life path and actions is rather rare nowadays, and often disliked and opposed by others. When people act according to it, living and acting accordingly.
And you know what I say to that? Oh well, oh well. If somebody doesn't want to live like seeing their life like this, oh well. For those of us who are living our lives this way, oh well, right? Yeah.
And Poppy says, when we're in a difficult place, we forget that it won't be forever because it feels like it will be forever, but it only takes a decision to change it. And I agree with you, Poppy. Sometimes the decision is about changing how you think about it. You may be in a difficult position. I remember I had a student who had been in solitary confinement for a year in South Sudan, and he was in a box. He was put in for a month at a time, and it was renewed every month, and he couldn't stand up. So it was just food, the toilet was there, his food. And I said to him, how did you cope? How come you didn't go crazy? And he said, they took everything from me. They took my freedom. They took absolutely everything. But I had one thing they couldn't take, and that was my mind. And I decided they were not taking it. So even though every other freedom, it was his inner world that they could not take from him. And that is and that really, really touched me because, and as Druids, once we start on the bardic path, it's around developing our inner world and strengthening it and growing it, our own inner growth, etc. But when you can make so many decisions inside, even though externally you're constrained, but the freedom that can offer, and that guy survived.
Yeah.
I mean, I never got to ask him, what was it, because I remember I used to read when I was younger in my teens, World War II books about, guys in solitary confinement where one built a house in his mind and one walked home to Russia in his mind, that kind of thing. What he did to keep his mind going. But just say that we can make a decision about our lives at the moment. It may not change it outside, but inside it can.
Absolutely. Well, and on that World War II example, there's studies being done that the survivability of people who were going through the Holocaust, people who were going through massive starvation, whose trauma was an everyday event, they held on to that idea of hope. Even if it was just one single piece, then their chances of surviving that massive ordeal was exponentially larger than those who had lost hope.
And Viktor Frankl, I don't know if you read his
Viktor Frankl, that's exactly it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, he made a decision that he visualized him. They were being marched, the prisoners, from one part of the camp to the other, and he tripped and fell, and the soldiers started beating him, and he thought, if I stay lying down, they'll beat me and I'll die, or I can choose to get up. And he visualized himself standing on a podium telling people of his experience. Mm-hmm. And actually, the person who told me that story was in the audience listening to Viktor Frankl. And he survived. And it was that choosing. Mm-hmm. Now, he may have been killed, but the point is that those who didn't choose, or who chose to give up, which is just as valid.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You can say, you know what, I've had enough, and I'm ready to go to the other side. And I think that's as valid as anyone else. But that notion that in your mind, if you can make a choice, that can really empower you. Absolutely. And hope is a great a motivator. Annette says, sometimes making the decision to change can be difficult, especially when the person has been in an environment of little or no support. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, we do need, we need somebody in whatever the kind of relationship is to help us. It is very, very difficult. But I suppose the person in solitary confinement had support in the past. Mm-hmm. I mean, they say if you've had one person in your life who has been there for you, that can sustain you in other trials and tribulations, is that, yes, I have been loved, I have people, so I am worthy and I can make some changes. If you haven't had it, I think that's really, really difficult. Yeah. Absolutely.
You don't have that, you don't have that that discernment. You don't have that experience that when you're dealing with this, you can't be looking back to those previous cycles, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, you certainly, that was one of my questions, your biggest challenge you've overcome, but you've certainly done that. Or have you had a bigger one than just all you've been talking about?
Well, I would say in talking about circles, I would say that that recurring piece about lack of control in my life has been a recurring thing. I mean, my life in Wales, my life in North Wales, and why in my memory, Wales of my memory is such a beautiful place, is when I was going through speech therapy and I was in the education system over there, I was getting some amazing support. They would send a taxi from one school. I was at a little tiny school in Cerwis. They would send me down to Llandudnog, which was a local language unit, and they would send me in a taxi, a 20-minute journey in a taxi. They paid for that, right?
Yeah.
All of these supports, my family made it very comfortable for me over there because it was just normal. I was just Ben, right? I was Ben, and I just needed a little extra support here and there. And then I came to Canada, and so much of that changed. I was suddenly British. I was suddenly different. I was bullied. I was made to feel like I didn't belong. The words "go back to your home country" was said by another little 10-year-old. And it was horrible, right? But that, again, put into that idea that I did not have control in my life. And in essence, I think that's why so many of the decisions that I've regretted in my life have come back to that idea of they were made in moments where I didn't feel like I had control, and then I had to either go with somebody else's flow, or I didn't take responsibility, my own responsibility, my own actions, right? Yeah. So overcoming that, I would say, is a big piece, and so yeah.
So, what's the most reckless thing you've done?
Oh,
That you can share.
It's not going to top what Clinty was saying a few weeks ago. I would say the most reckless thing I've done. I've done so many reckless things. I can't think of one. Okay, the most reckless thing I've done was I took on 4 jobs at the same time when I was in university the last time. I was working in residence. I took on a TA position. I was working for Student Life, and I also had another job too. And that was because I was in such a place of dreading graduating and going out into the field of social work, because I did not want to do it, that I was trying to distract myself, and that precipitated me burning out completely and needing to leave, and other things that happened at that moment. So that's the most reckless thing. I certainly learned what my threshold was back then. Yeah.
And funny, leaving social work, it would have been very hard had you qualified to leave it, to leave something you had done. So in a sense, in some way, it worked to your advantage.
I think so. I think so. Because otherwise, I wouldn't have started taking the courses down in Kitchener here. I wouldn't have gone to Toronto to work in spiritual psychotherapy. I wouldn't have found a road home, right? And I feel very privileged for that. But I've also worked hard for all of this now. So like looking at the master's programs I'm looking at over in the UK, I can afford to do that and make it workable by working part-time, which is only 20 hours. I mean, that's full-time for a therapist, but it's really part-time hours. And being able to then fund the fun stuff I really want to do, which is a master's, right? The fun stuff I really want to do, which is living in the UK and going to all of these different gatherings and all of this,
What's your BA in?
So right now my BA I transferred, and it was really cool. I'm actually really proud of this. So I transferred into liberal studies in the local university in town, and I had no idea that it's one of the best in Canada. I have no idea, and I'm not trying to
You're not bragging.
No. Okay. So I applied as a part-time student originally first. Last January, started taking some courses. When I transferred in, the liberal studies the breadth requirements were just completed. And so I was like, oh, this is cool. But then I had 20 courses left, half of the degree left to do, because they would only give me 50% transfer credits. And they were just going to be all sorts of nonsense. Like it could be anything, that were electives. So I decided, okay, well, what can I do with this? I want it to mean something. So I asked the right questions, because I'm 36 years old and I have university background, right? I know how to shout it at admin staff and all that. So I was able to actually finagle it. So I'm doing 4 minors. So I'm doing a minor in medieval studies, in classical studies, in religious studies, and in history. And that all works because many of those are cross-listed. So the masters that I'm looking at doing, I'm exploring the folklore masters at Hertfordshire College University in Hertford. Sure.
In folklore.
In folklore, yeah. So it's led by Dr. Owen Davies, who's one of the major researchers in magic and witchcraft.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but I'm also looking at some others. There's a couple of other cool master's programs going over there, and that really will then focus in on my writing work, because I really want to work and write more in magic and spirituality, and I think those would work very well with each other. So I'm very proud of that. Like sitting and putting all the. I was sitting with the academic advisor from one of the minors, and she was like she doesn't have 18, 19, 20-year-old students figuring all this out, because 18, 19, 20, I know I never knew how to see opportunity like I do now. So I'm kind of proud of that.
Brilliant. Where are you going to move back where are you going to go back to live?
So the first year, if I pursue a master's, first year is going to be wherever that happens to be. But I've been looking at the Shropshire, the Welsh borders area.
Oh, okay.
So I'm originally from, my sister works in Wrexham, and I'm from Cerwis area. I don't want to be too far into Wales. I don't like to be remote. I want to be close to Wales so I can go and visit. I'm certainly learning Cymraeg. But I also need to be closer to more central locations. So it'll be somewhere in there. Yeah. But I mean, looking at the pricing of rent over there now, I'm like, for the first year, being close to London will be fun, because, I go to a British museum, go and hang out with people.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, no,
Brilliant. Yeah. So we're coming to the end. Okay. So a concern you have about the modern world?
I am very concerned with, and it might sound very specific, but I'm very concerned with AI. I'm very concerned with ChatGPT. I'm very concerned with the automation of things that make us human, right? If I'm thinking of the Jetsons world, I want to have, things that are going to free up my time. But I don't want to be reading books written by a computer. I don't want to be reading material that's created with something that doesn't have a soul, or a soul that might be very different from my own, right? So I'm very concerned about how that is going to impact us. I'm very concerned with the way that stories are told in our world. Being in North America here, and I'll be honest, one of the reasons I don't want to be close to the United States is because of the way that story is being perverted down there. I'm not going to go into politics, of course, but it is interesting to see how things are evolving in that way. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned about connecting and how we connect with each other, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So what gives you hope then?
The kids, I'll be honest with you. It's the kids. So when I started going, when I say kids, like people who are younger than me, when I went back to university, I had this idea in my head that, it'll just be 18, 19-year-olds. I was very patronizing, and I own that. I really do need to own that. But I have been so impressed with that Generation Z, I think they're now. The ways that they're questioning, the ways that they're taking for granted things, that just going with the flow, and also the way that they are refinding things that I think my generation lost. They're you go into a lecture hall and you've got a load of people knitting, and you've got people chatting about literature, and you've got people talking about connecting with each other. Whereas when I was in university, I feel like my generation was ill-equipped to connect with each other in that way, So I'm curious about what they will make the world into. Yeah. Great.
So your favorite season and your favorite ceremony on the Wheel of the Year. My final questions.
That's a good one. Favorite season is autumn. I love autumn. Absolutely love autumn. I love it's that liminal time, right? And favorite ceremony, I would say again, Samhain. I really love that time of year when the light is just starting to turn and you can feel the chill in the air. I don't like what comes afterwards, but I do like
Yes. Listen, it's been such a joy talking to you, Ben. I'll allow you to say goodbye to everybody, and then we look at the comments, because there were so many comments we didn't get to look at.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your lovely comments, and I'm sorry we didn't get to deal with all of them, but they're very welcome nonetheless. And then I know people have chats within the chat themselves, which is great. So I look forward to seeing you next week. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or again, if it's a recording of this, and slán go fóill. Bye-bye.